Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. I'm really excited about today's video because I finally feel like it is the right time to talk about some of the lessons that I learned while I was traveling outside of the US. And these are not practical lessons, they're more so lessons for the heart, lessons that I'm still processing and trying to implement into my life. I feel like they were really meaningful and they took place while I was traveling, so I wanted to talk about them. For those who don't know, I left my job last December and left the US to travel across parts of Mexico and Asia. I was gone for about 5.5 months. I've got other videos on my channel where I talk about each specific location. I also did like a roundabout video where I talked about how I made this trip happen. One thing that I haven't really talked about has been how I grew emotionally, spiritually on this journey. I just haven't really felt ready to talk about some of the things that I learned, partly because I was still processing. Like, people still ask me, how was this, that, and there's still stuff. Like the other day, I was talking to a couple of gals that I hadn't seen in a long time, and I was still struggling to express some of the feelings that I experienced in a specific place. That led me to kind of reflect on my trip a little bit more. It's been like almost a year since I took off. It's been 9 months, but I'm still processing. I'm still thinking about it. The other night I was laying in bed with G, completely like getting ready for bed. And I was like, G, do you remember that guy who sold the little wiener hot dogs at the little esquina in Progreso? Like, still thinking of the exact location, thinking of this person's face, thinking about the things that he sold. Like, I'm still really there, which is kind of crazy. It was an incredible trip, and I want to share some of the things that I learned. For Mexico, one of them for sure, routine, lacking routine. I think that was the first time that I really confronted what it would be like to live a life without a routine. Every day things were changing. We were constantly moving. I was having to figure out what my favorite new spots were, like where my favorite tortilleria place is, where my favorite mercado is. These are things that you don't really think about as parts of your routine and parts of what keeps you feeling rooted in a place or a part of a community. But when you're constantly moving, you do struggle to develop a sense of routine. And so my routine was shot. And it's funny because I think when we're living in a routine, we often think to ourselves, like, I hate this fucking routine. I want a new routine, or I want out of this routine. And I think to that, I would say you might want out of the routine you're in, but you don't want out of a routine. I think a routine, for me, it keeps me organized. It keeps my anxiety at bay because I feel like I know what's going on, what's coming. I'm a big planner, not in the sense that I like to like plan like details, but more so that I like to know what my day and week is going to look like. I'm pretty sure it's got to do with my anxiety, let's be real. But lacking routine was something, or routine, or the need for routine. The fact that I didn't hate routine, I just hated the routine that I was in before, was something I realized while I was traveling. Another thing that I really had to confront was my financial anxiety, my financial trauma, my financial insecurities. Not having a job and living off of your savings will definitely do it for you. When we were traveling through Mexico, I think there were parts of Mexico that were really affordable, and there were other parts of Mexico that were not. And I think that's when my anxiety was most prevalent. And to be quite honest, I'm still kind of working through that because I was unemployed for a long time after we got back, and I just got my job back a few weeks ago. So to me, I finally feel financially secure again. I finally feel like I have money to spend on non-essentials, which is like a thing and a very privileged feeling to have. But that was another big lesson. Refusing to identify with my career. That was a big one. I think for a really long time, I thought I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up as an adult in terms of my career. And when that shifted in my mid-20s, well, like my whole life shifted in my 20s, but When my career shifted in my 20s, I picked up the next thing that I thought I wanted to do as a career. And I think as I've entered into my 30s, that has changed. Although that has changed and evolved, I was still working within the framework of gaining experience so that I could put it on my resume, so that I could apply to X job or I could apply to X program. And having no job and no true sense of direction. I mean, I had to confront that. That was like, yeah, girl, you don't know what the fuck you're doing and you have no plan going home. Like, what are you going to do? That was a thing. But then also to de-identify with my identity as a future psychologist or a future counselor, or even before that, I was certain I wanted to be a nurse or a doctor. Like all of these career goals and dreams kind of disappeared. And I was faced with trying to figure out who I was outside of my career, outside of this program or this degree that I want to obtain. I can't say I fully know who I am outside of my career, but I've definitely met her and we're sitting together for coffee every morning and we are exploring and we're constantly thinking about who we are. And that's been really great. Fear of instability. Yeah, when you are moving a lot and you don't really know where you're going next and you don't really know when this is gonna stop, this instability, it can feel pretty daunting. It can feel pretty scary. It could definitely activate your anxiety and make you feel afraid, nervous, unsure that you're doing the right thing, unsure that you're making the most of the experience, unsure of your safety, unsure of your comfort. I mean, those were also things that I had to confront while I was traveling. Looking back, I'm really grateful for, because I think that taught me a lot about what I do have back home. We live in a really comfortable and privileged country, and a lot of us, if we're lucky, will live really comfortable and privileged lives. And when you are traveling on very limited funds, you kind of have to confront the discomforts and you kind of have to part ways with the extra little things that you used to do when you had a job and you had money and you were living back home. That was honestly also a huge character builder for me, because it reminded me of what I am capable of tolerating while still being comfortable when I really think about it, without all of these extra luxuries in life. That feeling was still something I was kind of going through up until 3 weeks ago when I got a job back. So just being uncomfortable was pretty great. Facing my ego, the incoherence, my Spanish, the exploitative, the privileged. Ooh, that's a good one. So when I was in Mexico, I speak Spanish and I thought that I would be fine. And I thought that I could still convey my identity of who I was in Spanish. But I don't speak good Spanish, or I didn't. I think my Spanish has gotten better, but I do think that not practicing it so much or not reading it or whatever as often as I did while I was living there, my Spanish got so much better. But even still, with my Spanish being okay, I sound like a fucking idiot. My Spanish is like second grade level Spanish. I want to say it's like sixth grade. Maybe high school. But back right in the beginning, I truly was, there were words that I would ask G, like, how do I say this? Or what did he just say? Etc., etc. Confronting my ego around that was also part of what helped me confront who I was, outside of my career. But like, who am I really? Who am I outside of my degrees? All of the labels that we put on ourselves, like, who are we outside of that? I think we over-identify with certain parts of our lives. And I am so much more than the 5 things that I tell people that I am when I first meet them. You know what I mean? And so that was part of facing my ego. Also the exploitative, like being in Mexico as an American, you have to confront your role in the exploitation of the tourist industry, Airbnb. What does it mean to show up to like, for me, it was huge because it's like a part of me feels Mexican and feels like I deserve to be here, but the other part of me that's American feels like I need to give more, or like, am I exploit? Like, it was just, yeah, especially when we were living in Tulum, where we were in like a really nice area and we were surrounded by white, affluent Mexicans and Americans living in this part of Tulum. And I just thought to myself, like, what makes me different than them? I am renting an Airbnb in the same neighborhood that they are. What makes me different? You know, just having to confront that, I think was hard. And then just like the privilege of, when we are traveling, our dollar goes so much farther than the peso. The places that we were staying at, we ended up staying in nicer areas that we could afford because we have the dollar. All of these privileges that we have, I kind of had to confront and see my role in the colonialism and the capitalism and the privilege and the gentrification of it all. Yeah, that was fun. Some of the good things, though, I mean, I learned so much about my culture. I learned a lot of history, Mexican history. When we were in Mexico City, we went to a courthouse and we did like a tour that typically law students do, but we just went because it was free and it was dope. Like, we learned so much about the legal system in Mexico. Just learning about my culture, my history, my roots, spending time with my grandparents and learning a little bit more about the state where my mother is from, the place that is my parents' home, and the place that feels like home to me too. Those were some of the big lessons that I learned while I was in Mexico. And now I want to talk about Asia. So Asia just hit different. I think because I had been traveling for a while at that point, I was already familiar with the discomforts, the instability, the pretty constant anxiety. The missing home, the novelty of constantly having to be in a new place. The first country that I went to in Asia was India. If you haven't watched my India video, that is one video to watch. I experienced a mini car accident and I experienced being at a scam of an ashram, and I just experienced being in a completely separate continent from all of the things that I know, all of my friends and family, for the first time ever. So naturally, I would have a panic attack at the airport in India. I was thinking about this, and I think the first time I had a panic attack was when I was like 7 or 8, and I was traveling in Mexico, and I hadn't had one since. But India did it for me. India's lessons, I mean, they're so special. I learned a lot about independence. I learned a lot of what it means to travel alone as a woman. This can be really scary for a lot of people. And I don't know why I didn't really think this through. Probably because I'm a pretty independent person here at home. Once it computed in my brain that I was traveling through India as a woman by myself, some fear definitely got into me. G was spoiling me rotten in Mexico, having to really pick up after myself, not like in terms of things, but like tasks and ways to get home or ways to get around or ways to advocate for myself were just like huge. Me realizing I was a people pleaser in India, that was a lesson. I do have a magical skill of being able to sense when somebody's energy is off, or like when something doesn't feel right. I'm a witch, girl. Like, I've kind of known that I was a people pleaser, but I kind of thought that it was with the people that I knew. But this trip, like, in your motherfucking face, bitch. Like, you are people pleasing and you need to fucking stop. Or like, this is gonna be the end of you. This is ridiculous. That mostly came into play when I was at the ashram, and I really had to advocate for myself and not care so much about what people were going to say or think. Also, when I got injured and was dealing with the aftermath of my injury, me having to seek medical care in a different country, different systems, like me having to work through really hard things, not only gave me like extreme compassion for people that come to the US and are having to deal with the US healthcare system, but also just me having to deal with me all by myself was really scary. Me having to deal with all of that. However, I was traveling alone for the first time. And so I could literally do whatever I wanted. I could eat wherever I wanted. I could go wherever I wanted. I could rest whenever I wanted. Being able to do whatever you want because there's nothing holding you back. You don't have a job. You don't have anybody around. You're on the opposite time zone of everyone that you know. It was just glorious. Kind of lonely, but glorious. The loneliness actually kind of helped me to go out and talk to people and make friends with people. And I am still friends with one of the girls that I met where we were in India. Like, that's freaking cool. Spirituality, my exposure to Tibetan Buddhism and all of the Buddhism practiced in Asia was wonderful. It's funny, I was actually reading Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach, like throughout all of my Mexico leg, and it almost felt like a preparation for what I was going to experience while I was traveling in Asia. The different religions that I was exposed to and all of their similarities, and this idea that I have that we all kind of believe very similar things, even indigenous knowledge, like back from Mayan people, from Mayan communities, all of it. I'm just like, a lot of the things overlap. That also makes me feel like if there's a different version of this particular piece of knowledge in all of these different religions, then maybe there's some truth to some of these things, right? Overall, this experience of feeling like I'm really evolving into a different person and kind of awakening was definitely a big part of Asia. And I felt like I was preparing myself while I was in Mexico, which is really, really beautiful. Bali was another good one because Bali, I did nothing. I didn't leave my homestay because my wound got infected. Having to deal with the fear of like potentially my trip getting canceled early, me not having health insurance, me having to navigate a healthcare system with already like no job, limited funds, like my financial anxiety was like right there. Me having to ask for help to get to the clinic every other day so that somebody could clean my wound. Me having to get on a motorcycle in a very busy country when the accident that happened in India was on a motorcycle. I really had to face a lot of fears while I was in Indonesia. I had to make the very difficult decision to stay in my homestay the entire time that I was in Indonesia. And that was hard. My mind went so far as to thinking I could lose my foot. And having to confront that fear, like having to really think about like what happens if this foot wound doesn't get better, or if I have a particular like strain of bacteria that's causing this and I'm going to like, they're going to amputate my foot, or what are they like? It was bad. Confronting disability, lack of independence, like after I'd had all of this independence, then like losing it entirely. Honestly, if it wasn't for all of this, like I would not have stayed home to rest. The reflections of that trip are also up on my YouTube channel, so I suggest you go watch that one too. That's a really good one. All of the people that I encountered were like lovely people. The family at my homestay was incredible. Like the dad of the girl who owns the homestay would take me to the clinic every other day on his motorcycle. I would go outside and I would sit with the grandma and just watch her or ask her about her life. I talked to the grandpa one night and he talked to me about reincarnation and the way it shows up in his family, which was just like a really interesting take, and like the first time I'd ever really been exposed to somebody who truly believed in reincarnation. Also, yeah, I forgot to mention, while I was in India, I did end up hanging out with a monk and had like an evening of talking about what his life was like. I also volunteered at like an English school for Tibetan refugees, and I like the things I learned from them was beautiful and miraculous. Throughout all of these difficult times, there was always moments of beauty, and it just felt like spirit was there. It felt like I was being taken care of, or it felt like I was safe. Like, even though there were all of these things that were making me feel unsafe, there was this force that was making me feel safe. Going to Japan, honestly, I'm not gonna lie, Japan was great, like in every way, shape, and form. And the thing is, when you're comfortable and there are privileges everywhere, it kind of is hard to like emotionally grow. I mean, you can definitely do the work, but I wasn't doing the work in Japan. Like, I was living my best life. No involvement. There was ramen, there were bidets, there was matcha. It was all great. It was all great. I have nothing bad to say about Japan. The Philippines was also a place where we didn't really get to do very much. The lessons there were mostly like practical lessons. More than anything, there's a lot of suffering when you step outside of your hotel room and you see a lot of the kids that are living on the street or are selling fruit. It was just a lot of moments of reflection. We really have it good. I have it really good. I am so lucky, because I do feel like part of this is just luck of where I was born and how I was raised, and the privileges that allowed me to get an education, that allowed me to get the job, that allowed me to make the income, that like allowed me to be doing what I was doing. It just felt like I felt very lucky. Vietnam, I think it was a lot of the same. I think the biggest lesson with Vietnam was just confronting the fact that like we just can't play the American card wherever we go, and like we had forgotten to get our visas and we had to expedite our visas, and just we almost didn't go to Vietnam. Similar to the Philippines, just like I would see people working their asses off all day long out in the heat, and I would just think to myself, the job I have back home that I complain about is not something I should complain about. I think coming back, there were some big, I realized, okay, I really like routine. I really want to feel rooted. I really want to feel like I'm part of a community. But as you guys may have seen, I was living at my parents' for a little over a month. I really had to face patience, like face me wanting to start my life, me wanting to get a job, me wanting to like do all of these things because I was back in the US, and like life being like, no, bitch, like you're gonna have to deal with living back at home, confronting like some old traumas from being at home and being in the home that you grew up in and being in the neighborhood that you grew up in and went to high school in. Lots of stuff to confront, and patience was a big one, and just getting back into a routine, even though I knew that I was going to be changing my routine when I moved in with G. I think currently some of the stuff that I'm really working through, I really am in an era of caring for myself in the most meaningful way possible. Like, I'm really trying to take care of my mental health, of my physical health, of my gut health, of my emotional health, of my energy health. Some might think I'm isolating, and honestly, like, I really have to challenge myself sometimes and really go out and do things, because I do mostly like being home. And a part of that, as far as 3 weeks ago, was that I didn't have a job, so I didn't have money to spend, so I just like wasn't doing stuff. But now that I do have money, I'm just like slowly easing back into the world. But I'm just in an era where I am my favorite company, and I want to be with myself. I want to hang out with myself, and I don't want to have to pretend. I don't want to have to go to things I don't want to go to, or hang out with people I don't want to hang out with, or like do this whole thing. A lot of the last my life, I've hung out with people and done things to please, right? To make sure everyone's happy, not ever really checking in to see if I'm enjoying myself, if I want to be there, if I like the person. I'm really taking my time and just being really intentional about my time and my energy and where I spend it. I'm just in a different era. I'm in a different time. I'm a different person. Some of the lessons that I've just talked about, like, those are big lessons. And I am so grateful, because I don't know how long it would have taken me to recognize some of the things that I was confronting. Oh my God, and I didn't talk about a big one. In Mexico, my depression that I was dealing with when I was living here in the US persisted. It remained. It was there. And I really had to stop over-identifying with it. And rather than saying I'm Diana and I have depression, it was more, I'm Vienna, and I deal with depression from time to time. I think when you over-identify with a specific mental illness, it becomes your whole persona. And something like depression is tricky because you don't really think that it can just be temporary. Anxiety is a thing that I live with constantly, always. And I don't know if I'll ever not live with it, but it's not something that goes away. Depression felt like that for me, but I knew a life without it. So it felt like, okay, this is a thing that I'm going to have to deal with now. And it wasn't until I really confronted my depression that I was like, oh, is it just that I'm sad right now? And like, I won't be sad tomorrow? Or is it just that I'm like in my luteal phase of my cycle and everything feels hard and will feel hard for the next 10 days? Like, where is this sadness coming from? Because, you know, when you're living this awesome life of just travel without a job, you'd think the depression would go away. But I still had bad days. I was dealing with all of this, right? So really having to sit with my depression was fun. Allowing all of my emotions to pass through me was really, really nice. I think this is where I'm going to end the video. I am in a really happy place in my life right now, and I am so lucky for the lessons that I learned while I was traveling. If you have the opportunity to travel, I mean, girl, just do it. And yeah, you're going to be uncomfortable and scared and all of the things I mentioned and more, because I don't know what you're dealing with. The new version of yourself that comes back, if you come back, because I get it, it's just really cool. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about my travels, please comment down below and subscribe if you like this kind of content. I'm really happy you're here. Okay, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.